Welcome to today's episode where we'll be exploring Brené Brown's transformative book, The Gifts of Imperfection. Let go of who you think you're supposed to be and embrace who you are. First published in 2010, this book has become a cornerstone text in the field of personal development, offering profound insights into how we can live with more authenticity, courage, and connection. What makes Brown's work so compelling is her unique combination of rigorous research and deeply personal storytelling. As a research professor at the University of Houston, Brown has spent decades studying vulnerability, courage, shame, and empathy. But unlike many academics, she doesn't just present dry findings. She weaves her own struggles and breakthroughs into her work, creating a narrative that feels both scientifically grounded and intimately relatable. In The Gifts of Imperfection, Brown introduces us to the concept of wholehearted living, a way of engaging with the world from a place of worthiness. Today, we'll explore the core ideas of this book, examining how perfectionism, shame, and fear keep us disconnected from our authentic selves, and how cultivating courage, compassion, and connection can lead us toward more fulfilling lives. So let's begin our journey into what Brown calls the gifts that come when we embrace our imperfections rather than constantly striving to overcome them. The culture of scarcity. Understanding never enough. Before diving into Brown's specific guideposts for wholehearted living, it's important to understand the cultural context she's addressing. Brown describes a culture of scarcity that pervades our society, a persistent feeling that we are never good enough, never perfect enough, never thin enough, never powerful enough, never successful enough. Simply, never enough. This scarcity mindset isn't just an individual psychological issue. It's reinforced by advertising, social media, and cultural messages that constantly highlight our deficiencies and sell solutions to problems we didn't know we had. How many times have you scrolled through Instagram only to feel worse about your body, your home, your vacations, or your life choices? That's scarcity culture at work. Brown argues that this never-enough problem is actually exacerbated by society's unprecedented abundance. Paradoxically, the more options and resources we have access to, the more acutely we feel our shortcomings. When theoretically anything is possible, our limitations feel like personal failures rather than just part of the human condition. I'm reminded of a time I spent 30 minutes trying to choose a toothpaste at the store, paralyzed by the overwhelming number of options. Should I prioritize whitening, gum health, breath freshening, all natural ingredients? As I stood there, increasingly anxious about making the wrong choice about something as trivial as toothpaste, I realized I was experiencing exactly what Brown describes: the tyranny of too many options coupled with the fear of not measuring up. This scarcity thinking manifests in three dangerous patterns that Brown identifies. 1. Comparison, constantly measuring ourselves against others. 2. Disengagement, numbing ourselves to avoid uncomfortable feelings. 3. Perfectionism, attempting to earn approval and avoid shame through flawlessness. Of these three, Brown particularly highlights perfectionism as a serious obstacle to wholehearted living. And here's where her perspective might surprise you. She doesn't see perfectionism as a positive trait that sometimes goes too far. Rather, she views it as a self-destructive and addictive belief system. Perfectionism is not the same thing as striving to be your best. She writes, perfectionism is not about healthy achievement and growth. Perfectionism is the belief that if we live perfect, look perfect, and act perfect, we can minimize or avoid the pain of blame, judgment, and shame. The problem with perfectionism isn't just that it's unattainable, it's that it's actually a form of armor that prevents authentic connection. When we're busy projecting an image of flawlessness, we can't be truly seen, known, or loved for who we actually are. The research journey, from breakdown to breakthrough. One of the most compelling aspects of the Gifts of Imperfection is the story of how Brown came to her insights. She didn't set out to study vulnerability or imperfection. She was actually researching connection. But her findings took her in an unexpected direction that triggered what she candidly calls a breakdown, or what her therapist more gently termed a spiritual awakening. Brown began by studying people who lived with a deep sense of love and belonging, hoping to identify what they did differently from those who struggled with connection. What she discovered shocked her. The primary difference wasn't about skills or knowledge. It was about worthiness. Those who felt connected believed they were worthy of connection. This might sound obvious in retrospect, but it challenged Brown's own perfectionist tendencies and professional identity. As a researcher who prided herself on finding actionable strategies and clear-cut solutions, she was confronted with a much more elusive variable: the courage to be imperfect. The participants in her research who experienced the most connection were those who embraced vulnerability rather than trying to control or predict everything. They believed that what made them vulnerable made them beautiful. They didn't speak of vulnerability as comfortable, just necessary. Brown humorously describes her reaction to these findings as, "No, no, no, that's not going to work for me." Like many of us, she wanted connection without vulnerability, certainty without risk. Her professional quest suddenly became intensely personal as she realized she would need to apply these findings to her own life, a process that involved therapy, soul-searching, and challenging many of her core beliefs. This personal dimension of Brown's work is what makes it so powerful. She's not preaching from a position of having it all figured out. She's sharing what she's learned as a fellow traveler on the journey toward wholehearted living. Defining wholehearted living. So what exactly is wholehearted living that Brown advocates? She defines it as engaging in our lives from a place of worthiness. It means cultivating the courage, compassion, and connection to wake up in the morning and think, no matter what gets done and how much is left undone, I am enough. It's going to bed at night thinking, yes, I am imperfect and vulnerable and sometimes afraid, but that doesn't change the truth that I am also brave and worthy of love and belonging. Through her research, Brown identified 10 guideposts for wholehearted living, practices and mindsets that characterize people who live from this place of worthiness. Each guidepost involves cultivating something positive while letting go of something that holds us back. Let's explore these guideposts, understanding both what they mean and how we might apply them in our everyday lives. Guidepost number 1. Cultivating authenticity by letting go of what people think. The first guidepost involves choosing authenticity over people-pleasing. Brown defines authenticity not as a fixed trait, but as a daily practice of letting go of who we think we're supposed to be and embracing who we actually are. This is easier said than done in a world where we're constantly managing our personal brands, curating our social media presence, and trying to meet others' expectations. Authenticity requires courage, the root of which comes from the Latin word cor, meaning heart. The original definition of courage was to tell the story of who you are with your whole heart. Brown shares a personal example of struggling with authenticity when giving a talk at a conservative Christian university. Worried about how her occasionally colorful language and liberal views might be received, she considered toning herself down. But a friend offered this powerful advice: be yourself. If they want you, they want you. If they don't, they don't. But don't try to talk them into it by being someone other than yourself. What struck me about this guidepost is how authenticity actually simplifies life. When we're not constantly shape-shifting to please different audiences, we conserve enormous amounts of mental and emotional energy. Yes, being our authentic selves might mean some people don't approve of us, but it also means the connections we do form are based on who we truly are. Guidepost number 2, cultivating self-compassion by letting go of perfectionism. The second guidepost focuses on treating ourselves with the same kindness and understanding that we would offer to a good friend. This means letting go of perfectionism, which, as we've already seen, Brown views not as a virtue, but as a self-destructive belief system. Brown makes an important distinction between healthy striving and perfectionism. Healthy striving is internally motivated. It's about personal growth and setting goals based on what matters to us. Perfectionism, by contrast, is externally motivated. It's about trying to earn approval and acceptance. I find it helpful to think about perfectionism as essentially outsourcing our self-worth, making it contingent on others' judgments rather than our own values. No wonder it leads to anxiety, depression, and paralyzing fear of failure. We've placed the measure of our worth in other people's hands. Self-compassion doesn't mean lowering our standards or making excuses for ourselves. It means recognizing our common humanity, understanding that mistakes and failures are part of the universal human experience. When we can embrace our imperfections with gentleness, we paradoxically become more able to learn, grow, and engage courageously with life. Brown shares how she practices self-compassion by keeping a permission slip in her wallet that says, "You are imperfect. You are wired for struggle, but you are worthy of love and belonging." Simple reminders like this can be powerful tools for interrupting our perfectionist patterns. Guidepost number 3, cultivating a resilient spirit by letting go of numbing and powerlessness. Resilience, the ability to overcome adversity and grow from challenges, is the focus of the third guidepost. Brown's research indicates that resilient people share several key characteristics. They're resourceful problem solvers. They seek help when needed. They believe they can do something that will help them cope with their feelings. And they have social support. But perhaps most importantly, resilient people understand the connection between numbing behaviors and feeling powerless. This insight was particularly eye-opening for me. Brown explains that many of us engage in numbing behaviors: excessive drinking, overeating, overworking, overspending, not just to avoid pain, but because we feel powerless in some area of our lives. The trouble is, we can't selectively numb emotions. When we dull our negative feelings through these behaviors, we also dull our capacity for joy, creativity, and connection. It's a package deal. You can't have a half-numb life. Brown offers a personal example of how she used to fantasize about running away from her stressful life, packing up her family and moving to a quiet town where she could open a bakery despite not particularly enjoying baking. She realized this fantasy was actually about numbing her feelings of being overwhelmed rather than addressing the real issues in her life. Cultivating resilience involves acknowledging our feelings rather than escaping them, practicing gratitude and joy even in difficult times, and trusting our intuition while also being willing to reason with ourselves. It's about maintaining perspective and recognizing that no emotion lasts forever. An insight captured in the mantra Brown shares. This feeling is uncomfortable, but it won't kill me. Guidepost number 4. Cultivating gratitude and joy by letting go of scarcity and fear of the dark. The fourth guidepost addresses our relationship with positive emotions, specifically our tendency to dress rehearse tragedy when experiencing joy. Have you ever found yourself in a perfect moment, perhaps watching your child sleep or experiencing a career triumph, only to have your mind immediately jump to all the terrible things that could happen to shatter that happiness? That's what Brown calls foreboding joy. Through her research, Brown discovered that the antidote to this fear is not more positive thinking, but rather gratitude. People who actively practice gratitude in their daily lives are much more likely to describe themselves as joyful and much less likely to catastrophize during moments of vulnerability. This finding challenges our intuition. Many of us believe that joy causes gratitude. I'm happy, so I feel grateful. But Brown's research suggests it actually works in the opposite direction. Gratitude practices lead to increased joy. The practical implications are clear. Daily gratitude rituals, whether keeping a journal, saying grace before meals, or simply pausing to acknowledge what's going well, aren't just nice ideas. They're essential practices for experiencing joy without fear. I love Brown's suggestion of leaning into joy, deliberately staying present in joyful moments rather than fast-forwarding to potential disaster scenarios. When we catch ourselves thinking, "This is too good to last," or "something bad is bound to happen," we can choose instead to say, "I'm feeling joy right now, and I'm grateful for this moment." Guidepost number 5. Cultivating intuition and trusting faith by letting go of the need for certainty. In our data-driven, evidence-based world, the fifth guidepost might seem counterintuitive. Brown advocates cultivating intuition and faith, not religious faith specifically, but faith in the sense of believing without seeing. She defines intuition as not a single way of knowing, but our ability to hold space for uncertainty and our willingness to trust the many ways we've developed knowledge and insight, including instinct, experience, faith, and reason. What I find fascinating about this guidepost is how it challenges the false dichotomy between rationality and intuition. Brown isn't suggesting we abandon critical thinking. She's recognizing that human knowing involves multiple channels, including bodily sensations, emotional responses, and pattern recognition that happens outside our conscious awareness. The obstacle to intuition isn't rationality, but certainty. Our desperate need to know and control outcomes. In a complex world where definitive answers aren't always available, learning to trust our inner voice becomes an essential skill. Brown shares her own struggle with this when her daughter was bullied at school. As a researcher, Brown wanted hard evidence and clear protocols. But as a mother, she knew something was wrong before she had all the facts. Learning to honor that knowing, even when she couldn't immediately prove it, was part of her growth toward wholehearted living. Faith enters the picture as our willingness to step into the unknown, to surrender our illusion of control, and to trust that we can handle whatever comes. This isn't blind optimism, but rather a profound acceptance of life's uncertainty coupled with confidence in our resilience. Guidepost number 6. Cultivating creativity by letting go of comparison. The sixth guidepost focuses on something many of us abandoned somewhere around middle school: creativity. Brown makes a powerful case that creativity isn't a luxury or a special talent possessed by a select few. It's an essential component of wholehearted living. There's no such thing as creative people and non-creative people, she argues. There are only people who use their creativity and people who don't. This perspective challenges the comparative thinking that leads so many of us to shut down our creative expression. How often have you thought, why bother painting, writing, dancing, singing when I'll never be as good as famous artists? Brown suggests that comparing our creative efforts to others' work is one of the fastest ways to extinguish the creative spark. Instead, she encourages us to create for the sake of creating, to value the process rather than fixating on the product. This reminds me of an experience I had in a community pottery class. As a beginner surrounded by skilled artisans, I initially felt embarrassed by my lopsided, heavy mugs. But over time, I noticed something interesting. The most experienced potters were often the most playful and experimental. They weren't comparing themselves to anyone. They were fully engaged in the creative process. Their example helped me find joy in creating imperfect pottery. And ironically, that's when my skills actually began to improve. Brown notes that creativity requires vulnerability because there's always the risk of failure or rejection. But the alternative, leaving our creative gifts unexpressed, exacts a much higher toll in terms of regret, resentment, and diminished vitality. Guidepost number 7. Cultivating play and rest by letting go of exhaustion as a status symbol and productivity as self-worth. In our hustle culture, the 7th guidepost might be the most countercultural of all. Brown challenges our valorization of busyness and exhaustion, pointing out that when people are asked to describe what brings meaning to their lives, they rarely mention productivity or accomplishments. Instead, they talk about moments of connection, joy, and engagement, many of which happen during play and rest. Brown cites compelling research showing that play is not a luxury, but a necessity for health and cognitive development. Play, defined as purposeless activity that makes us lose track of time and self-consciousness, literally shapes our brains, helps us practice social skills, stimulates creative thinking, and regulates our emotions. Yet many adults treat play as frivolous or selfish. We've bought into what Brown calls the exhaustion as a status symbol and productivity as self-worth paradigm, where being busy and tired has become a strange badge of honor. I had to laugh at myself when reading this section because I'm definitely guilty of the busy brag. How many times have I answered, "How are you?" with "so busy," as if my overscheduled life somehow proves my importance or value. Brown's research suggests this mentality is not only unhealthy, but actually counterproductive to meaningful achievement. The same applies to rest, not just sleep, though that's crucial, but true mental, physical, and emotional recuperation. In a culture that equates rest with laziness, deliberately building downtime into our lives becomes a radical act of self-care and, ultimately, sustainability. Guidepost number 8. Cultivating calm and stillness by letting go of anxiety as a lifestyle. The 8th guidepost addresses our relationship with anxiety. Not clinical anxiety disorders, but the chronic state of stress many of us have normalized. Brown distinguishes between calm, maintaining perspective, and managing emotional reactivity during stress, and stillness, creating space for self-reflection, prayer, or meditation. What makes this guidepost particularly challenging is that anxiety has become so pervasive that many of us don't even recognize it anymore. We've adapted to a constant state of hypervigilance, multitasking, and information overload. Our bodies are perpetually flooded with stress hormones, and our minds rarely experience genuine quiet. Brown shares her own struggle with anxiety, describing how she once viewed it as fuel for productivity rather than the health hazard it actually is. She had to learn through personal crisis and professional research that anxiety is not a sustainable energy source, and that calm and stillness are not just nice extras, but essential practices for wholehearted living. The practices she suggests include creating boundaries around technology use, deliberately slowing down daily activities, and cultivating awareness of emotional triggers. Rather than immediately reacting to stressful situations, she advocates the dig method, deliberate in our thoughts and behaviors, inspired by a sense of purpose, and grounded in our values. What resonated most with me in this section was Brown's observation that many of us are so uncomfortable with stillness that we'll do almost anything to avoid it. Checking our phones, turning on the TV, or keeping ourselves chronically busy. Yet, it's precisely in stillness that we reconnect with our deeper values and intuitive wisdom. Guidepost number 9. Cultivating meaningful work by letting go of self-doubt and supposed to. The 9th guidepost explores our relationship with work, not just paid employment, but any activity through which we contribute our talents and energy to the world. Brown defines meaningful work as using your gifts and talents to do what matters based on your values. What's striking about her findings is that meaningful work isn't determined by job title, salary, or status. It's about alignment between our actions and our values. People doing seemingly ordinary jobs often experience profound meaning when their work connects to what matters most to them, while those in prestigious positions can feel empty and disconnected if their work contradicts their core values. The primary obstacles to meaningful work are self-doubt and external expectations, what Brown calls the tyranny of supposed to. How many of us have chosen career paths based mainly on what our parents, society, or our own inner critic said we should do? How many talents remain unexpressed because we don't believe we're good enough, or because pursuing them seems impractical? Brown shares the story of a successful attorney who felt dead inside until he finally acknowledged his passion for teaching and made a mid-career change. Despite a significant pay cut, he described feeling alive for the first time in decades. Such stories challenge us to examine whether we're living our own lives or someone else's version of what our lives should be. This doesn't necessarily mean we all need to quit our jobs and pursue some idealized passion. Brown emphasizes that meaningful work can happen within existing roles when we find ways to express our values through our approach, relationships, and smaller choices throughout the day. Guidepost number 10. Cultivating laughter, song, and dance by letting go of being cool and always in control. The final guidepost might seem lighthearted after the weightier topics we've explored, but Brown insists it's essential. Cultivating laughter, song, and dance by letting go of constant self-consciousness and the need to appear in control. Through her research, Brown discovered that wholehearted people universally value the ability to be silly, to laugh at themselves, and to express joy through their bodies, whether through dancing, singing, or other forms of physical self-expression. Yet these natural human behaviors have become increasingly inhibited in our culture of cool, where vulnerability and uninhibited joy are often seen as embarrassing. I find it telling that we often need alcohol or other substances to give ourselves permission to dance or sing in public. We've become so concerned with how we appear to others that we can't access these fundamental forms of human expression without chemical assistance. Brown suggests that reclaiming our right to laughter, song, and dance isn't trivial. It's about reclaiming embodied joy and authentic self-expression. She shares the story of watching her daughter dance uninhibitedly at a school function, wondering at what age that natural movement would become self-conscious and restricted. Her commitment became to model for her children that joy doesn't require perfection or performance, just willingness to be fully present in our bodies and emotions. Integration. The dig deep approach. Having explored all 10 guideposts, Brown offers a practical framework for putting them into action through what she calls dig deep, a deliberate process for getting back in touch with our wholehearted nature when we find ourselves succumbing to old patterns. DIG stands for deliberate in thoughts and behaviors through prayer, meditation, or setting intentions. Inspired to make new and different choices based on our values. Taking action. Unlike the kind of digging deep that's about pushing through exhaustion or ignoring our needs, Brown's dig deep approach is about reconnecting with our authentic selves and consciously choosing behaviors aligned with our values. Conclusion. A practice, not a destination. As we come to the end of our exploration of the Gifts of Imperfection, it's important to emphasize that wholehearted living isn't a destination we reach once and for all. It's a daily practice of choosing courage over comfort, authenticity over approval, and worthiness over perfection. What makes Brown's work so powerful is its fundamental honesty about both the challenges and rewards of this path. She doesn't promise that embracing imperfection will be easy or comfortable, just that it's the only way to experience the genuine connection and joy we're wired for as humans. In a culture obsessed with fixing, improving, and optimizing, there's something profoundly subversive about Brown's central message. You are already worthy of love and belonging, not when you lose weight or get the promotion or find the perfect partner, but right now in all your messy, imperfect humanity. This doesn't mean we stop growing or challenging ourselves. Rather, it means our growth comes from a place of self-acceptance rather than self-rejection. We pursue our goals not to prove our worth, but to express our inherent gifts and values. The gifts of imperfection, as Brown reveals them, are paradoxical. When we embrace our vulnerability, we discover our strength. When we acknowledge our limitations, we find freedom. When we stop performing and start being authentic, we create deeper connections. And when we let go of who we think we're supposed to be, we find out who we actually are. In closing, I want to share one of my favorite quotes from the book. Wholehearted living is about engaging in our lives from a place of worthiness. It means cultivating the courage, compassion, and connection to wake up in the morning and think, no matter what gets done and how much is left undone, I am enough. Thank you for joining me in exploring the gifts of imperfection. Until next time, may you embrace your imperfections as the very things that make you worthy of love and belonging.